What's up, guys? Back here with another testing video. This is going to be a follow-up, or rather an extension on the testing video that I did previously, where we looked at using max roll rarity tablets and max roll quantity tablets over a 10 map test to just keep track of the loot and see, which strategy right now is more favorable in terms of, juicing your maps and just what feels the best when you're running your maps in PoE. The one that we're going to be testing in this video is going to be number of rare monsters. So as I mentioned in the previous video, if you happen to stumble upon this one and you haven't seen the previous one and you want to, check out what the results were for when we did quantity and rarity, go on my channel and watch that video, see what we got there. But the one we're going to be testing here is going to be number of rare monsters. This one I'm actually pretty optimistic about because in POE2, as many people know, all of the loot comes from the rare monsters, right? So the more rares that you have on your map, the more that you can put in there. In theory, there should be more loot, or the loot should be, not necessarily, maybe not better, higher quality, but at least in this test, I want to see an improvement in at least the number of just raw drops that we get in total. Because, a little bit of a spoiler, if you haven't seen the previous video, the number of drops that we were getting per map didn't feel great. It didn't feel good. A couple of things I just want to address, reiterate from the last video, and kind of stress that came up in the comments. By the way, the comments were fantastic. I love the discussion. I love having these discussions. I'm putting these videos out just to purely share results of testing. Nothing here is invented. I might have my opinions on how the maps felt running the specific strategy, but nothing here is invented. I'm just doing the maps, which I'll get into more specifically why I'm doing the maps in the way that I'm doing them. And I just want to share with what I get out of them and, get your own, opinion and, conclusion from that. I'm just putting out there what we get as raw drops from the maps, compare them and see, which one's better, which one's not. First thing is going to be the sample size. I understand that 10 maps is relatively small as a sample size to really, take into account the RNG that exists in a game like Path of Exile. But it's not completely, irrelevant because on a 10 map, on a 10 map scale, 10 map repetition, it gives me a good idea after those maps just to get a feel for, was this a favorable result that we got running this specific strategy? If it didn't feel good running it, if the number of drops we got wasn't great, comparatively across all the different tests that I'm going to do, then it'll lean me towards a direction to say, okay, even though there is a ton of RNG, in a video game, using this method might give us, some better RNG or improve our chances of getting more drops or better drops based on the affixes that we're using on the tablets. So I understand it's a small sample size. The last video, the quant rarity wasn't great, so I just don't want to do it over, 50, 100 maps. It just doesn't seem worth it to me right now. But once we do rarity, which I'm optimistic and hoping that it's actually going to be, the viable strategy now, also coming off of the things I've been reading on Reddit and what other content creators have been saying, as well as some of the comments from the last video saying that, rares is now the way to go. So I'm really optimistic about it, but just wanted to address that. Again, the suffixes here are exactly the same that we used on the previous test. The other thing I wanted to address is the maps themselves on the atlas that I'm running. I want to run clean maps. And what I mean by clean maps is there's no prior influence from the old towers on them. Some things I've been reading, people are saying, yeah, loot is really, really good. But then you find out that they're running like, double juiced maps where they had a bunch of rarity on them previously. And then now they're applying the new tablets and or rarity and quantity from the old towers, applying the new tablets, and the loot is great. I had that same experience. I ran some maps where I had the previous juice on them with, just normal Waystones, and the loot felt pretty good. But I want to future proof this as much as I can because in future leagues, there's not going to be that previous tower juice on the maps. So I'm cherry picking the map specifically that I'm running to be basically blank. I'm trying to avoid running maps with corruption on them, and I don't want to cleanse them to then get the cleansed maps because that's adding another layer of variability to the maps that is sometimes difficult to account for. Not every map you run is going to be cleansed. Not every map you run is going to have corruption on it. So I want to keep this as neutral as a comparison and a fair comparison as possible. So I'm basically just going to continue out from this spot that I have here and run these maps that have nothing on them. I want a very good baseline estimation, essentially the floor of what to expect when you're running a blank map with not the most amount of rarity on the map itself going into the gameplay. That's another thing I want to kind of speak on a little bit. I'm keeping the average rarity on the Waystone across the set of 10 to be exactly the same as the previous set. So if I go over into the spreadsheet, I've tallied up the increased item rarity on the Waystone, and I've averaged it again to be 53. Some people are saying, yeah, well, you need 100 rarity on the map, 80 plus rarity on the Waystone before you go in to actually get some loot. If that's the case and you need that on the map to get significant amount of loot for it to feel good, that I think isn't healthy for the game. So I want to get an idea of what the average player can expect by just running, maps that they have lying in their stash that they didn't need to go out and purchase, that they didn't need to apply the rarity omen on with a chaos orb prior to that, that they don't need to desecrate in order to get those high values. So that's why I want to keep it at 53%. These maps that I have here, I literally went into my stash, I went into my map tab, had a bunch of these lying around. I alchemy orbed whatever was able to be out. I slammed with exalted the ones that still didn't have 6 mods. And then I have a regex filter that searches for 40 plus rarity. I pick them out, I put them in this tab, I sort them, and then I average it out to 53. So 40 plus rarity is something that you can probably self-sustain fairly well by just running maps, collecting them, putting them in your stash, alch x them, and then pick those out. Cherry picking really high rarity isn't something that's super sustainable unless if you're not, doing additional measures to ensure that it's on there. Okay, again, just to reiterate, character rarity is exactly the same. I'm keeping it at 119%. I feel like that's a good number. And even for this, there's some players there's players that don't know about rarity on their gear and aren't using rarity on their gear or don't have 100 plus rarity on their gear. This is even kind of the I want to keep it mid tier, but a lot of players don't know about rarity, so they might not be putting it on their gear. So if the loot feels bad, like the previous video with 119% rarity, and I'm a player that knows about rarity, and there's probably at least half the player base that doesn't keep up with POE2 content, doesn't study the game or know the game at a deep enough level, such as you guys that go on YouTube and watch these videos and want to learn about the game and learn the mechanics. People that just play super casually that don't know about rarity. If the loot still feels bad with everything I have on my character and the power of my character, then how is it going to feel for those players that either just don't care about it or play casually enough that they don't know about it. So that's what I want to do here. Just get a really nice comparison. Rarity is still the same. Atlas trees exactly the same. I don't want to change anything from test to test. I want to keep it as consistent as we can. And yeah, I will go run these 10 maps, keep track of all the loot as I did last time, and then check in afterwards to see what the results were. All right, guys, we are all finished running the 10 maps using the increased number of rare monster tablets. So now let's get into the results. Only one raw divine drop in these 10 maps, which is a little bit disappointing. We got at least two when we were doing the rarity test, and we got three during the quantity test. 30 greater transmutes, 4 perfects, 24 greater augs, 4 perfect augs, 12 Val orbs, 1 perfect jewelers, 1 perfect regal orb, which we didn't see in any of the 2 previous tests, so that was pretty cool. 36x, 1 greater x, 6 chaos, and 1 greater chaos, and then a little bit of abyssal stuff down there at the bottom, and this talisman that I got, which I think is worth it's not worth much. I think like maybe 3 or 4 exalted. In terms of, I guess, the feel of the maps, they somewhat felt like going through them and actually running the maps a little bit better and more enjoyable than the previous tests. More rares on the map, just felt like there were well, obviously there were more monsters, but just felt like the maps were a little bit more densely packed. I found the maps running through the quant and the rarity test a little bit scarce. I know they made some adjustments to the size of the packs or the monster density that they said in the patch notes. And I definitely felt it in the first two rounds of testing. But in this one, the maps actually felt a little bit better and more fun to run. Even though the drops, might have actually been a little bit worse than the other two, which we'll get into in a second. I just want to reiterate and stress, if you jumped to this point in the video, just looking at the results, I encourage you to go back and just listen to sort of my explanation about why I'm doing the maps the certain ways that I'm doing, and the rarity that I have on the Waystones going in, and things like that, just to keep everything consistent and fair across all the different tests. And this isn't, again, meant to be like a giga juicing strat. I just want to get a good baseline of sort of what to expect in terms of loot. Okay, so going over a little bit more detail in the spreadsheet that I tracked everything. So I tracked obviously quantity in map, just the 4% that you get from the Atlas tree. The rarity in the map, this was, with the rarity on the Waystone, and then any increases with the explicit mods. And then, of course, the increased number of rare monsters in the map once all of the um, influences from the Atlas tree are then applied. It seems like if the Waystone you're using does not have any explicit modifiers on it that increase the number of rare monsters on the Waystone, then using the 340% rolled tablets gives you a minimum of 176% increased number of rare monsters. The way I worked out the math, I calculated it out to be like 178 point something percent in POE rounds down. So it should be 178%, but I guess with other rounding and the way they're calculating the percentages and the increases, 176 seems to be sort of the floor if you are using three 40% increased rolled tablets. I got as high as 441%. I guess that was a double proc on the in the 1 and 5, and then obviously the explicit mods effects then increase those explicits that naturally give a higher percentage increase of rare monsters. So all of that sort of calculated together, added together, gave me pretty high amount. I think in total number of drops for that map, it was probably the most number of things that actually I got out of the monsters. The most number of things that I picked up off the ground. But in terms of the quality of that loot, it was still fairly average compared to the rest of the maps, with everything there. So yeah, only the single divine orb came from a map with fairly low increased monsters. However, it did come from the map with the highest rarity. So this was, it's obviously a one of one of 10, but we can still get some good information out of this and see. The next test I want to do is probably going to be combining rarity and number of rare monsters in some ratio. So, this is fun for me. I can, run these maps, play around with the tablets, use different affixes on different roles, and now it's going to start, combining the different things that we're testing to see, where the sweet spot is and what's going to, give us a decent amount of loot and make it fun. I made this extra tab, which now compares the three test runs that we've done overall so far, comparing the rarity test, the quantity test, and the rare monster test. If you guys haven't seen that video, it's the previous one that I posted to this. I encourage you to go back, have a look at it, see what we got. The mood for the results for those tests was definitely a little bit worse than how I'm doing this one. Mainly just because I was really shocked at the level of the loot and how it really wasn't that great. But now with the rare monsters being even worse than the previous two tests, I've kind of just accepted it. At this point in the league, it's done. Nothing really matters in this league anymore in terms of currency. My character's done. Everything's done. So I want to do these tests just to kind of future proof and see what we can expect and how we should maybe be approaching, running our maps in future leagues and which tablets and combinations to sort of focus on. So the results are what they are. Like I mentioned earlier, nothing here is invented. I'm just running the maps, reporting what I get, and then we can, come to some conclusions or, get some information out of what we've tested. So I did a weighted sum of the total number of drops across the 3 runs so far. The way I determined or set the item weight was as follows: how many exalted orbs do I need to get one of the item that I have listed over here? So I went on the currency exchange, or I just click on Edge and say I want a orb of augmentation. They are 36 to 1 at this point. I don't know if it was the same when I was making this chart. It fluctuates a lot. And then I basically, whatever this was, I said, okay, I'm doing a 1 divided by 36. And that's how I come up with the number, whether it's 0.002 or whatever it was, depending on the number. That's how I determined. So just to reiterate, how many exalted orbs do I need to purchase a single item of the item listed in the list here? That's how I determined the item weight. The expedition logbooks can be a little bit variable, but from what I was looking, I think 80x is a pretty, fair assessment. Most of them will sell for that, maybe slightly more, maybe slightly less, but I thought 80 was pretty good because it's not an item that you can buy on the currency exchange. So the valuing it is a little bit more, can be a little bit more variable, whereas everything else here is on the currency exchange and it has some pretty, defined ratios of what the prices are. So with that, quantity still seems or has been calculated out to be the best in terms of the weighted sum of the drops that we got and sort of the value of them. Even though it was the lowest number of total drops, the value of them was just a lot more. And the divines here are really weighing a lot because compared to everything else, so a difference of one divine or two divines across a run really makes a huge difference. Like if we got a little bit luckier and rather than one, I got two divines in this, it, even for rare monsters, it still ends up being actually less in a weighted sum than what we got for rarity. So I'll just move that back. If you remove the divines completely out of this because they are such a high weight, rarity actually ends up being the best, quantity ends up being the worst, and then rare monsters is kind of in the middle. But that's just based on because now it follows the trend of like, okay, we got the most drops doing rarity, the least amount of drops doing quantity, and because the weights of everything else compared to a divine is relatively similar, then that just plays into there. But obviously we are dropping divines, so we have to take that into account of everything that we're getting. Okay. So yeah, I mean, my thoughts on this: the maps felt better to run, which is odd because the loot was worse. So even though I wasn't getting enough drops, the maps just felt more fun to run. Probably also because with Headhunter and more rares, you're just stealing more modifiers, so you constantly have like 20, 30 Headhunter buffs going, so the maps just feel more fun if you're zooming, going quick, and things like that. That probably played into a factor, but I mean, when you're playing the game, you want it to be fun. Like the fun is obviously the most important thing to have when you're playing the game. If you derive your fun in this game from making currency and getting a lot of drops, and obviously that can affect it. But you want to have fun going through the maps and playing and things like that. So, yeah, my thoughts on this. Yeah, rare monsters, even though they're responsible for dropping pretty much all of the loot in the game, juicing them as high as I could in this didn't really seem to pay off. I for my next tests, I want to do some combination. It will probably be rare monsters and rarity. I still want to keep the Waystone average rarity to that 53% because maybe at the end of this we'll do like a giga juicing. We'll use a chaotic omen on all of our maps. Make sure that all of the maps are 90 plus, 100 plus rarity before we're going in, and then do like rare monsters and then more rarity on top of it. That's for maybe down the road. I want to still keep it fairly baseline with how much rarity we're putting into the map beforehand, irrespective of the tablets. So yeah, I will think about what combination to use next, and yeah, I will hopefully post that video in the coming days. So yeah, thanks guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like the video, subscribe if you enjoy. I'll hopefully put out some more of these testing videos, and we can kind of use this to, formulate or steer the direction of how we're going to run maps in future leagues.